Leslie.
Down there.
Good morning, everyone. Secretary Redu, will you please call the roll?
Here. Here. Here.
Here.
Here.
Here. Whoa.
I guess he's there.
Chuck?
Yeah, Mike, we got you.
I'm here. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Again, good morning, everyone. The minutes of the October 7th and 8th and November 4th, 2010 meetings of the Board of Regents have been distributed. Are there any additions or corrections? If not, they stand approved. And with that, I will turn this over to President Riley.
Thank you, President Pruitt, and good morning, everybody. Good to see you all again this morning. It's my great pleasure now to introduce a special guest who's joined us to share his unique perspective on two important topics. Terry Hartle is the Senior Vice President of Government and Public Affairs for the American Council on Education in Washington, D.C. In the first part of his presentation, he'll lead us in a discussion about the future of higher education in the changed political environment, helping us understand how higher education has navigated the changing political landscape and what hills and valleys we might encounter in the coming months and years. And there will be some of both, no doubt. The second topic will cover a unique project that his office in the American Council on Education undertook this last year and that Wisconsin became a very major part of. It's a survey of young alumni, UW and nationwide, a major research project that ACE carried out to better understand how younger alumni feel about their higher education experience in their respective alma maters. As I mentioned yesterday, our enrollment is now closing in on 182,000 students. We're working to boost the number of graduates each year by 80,000 over the next 50 years beyond our normal trajectory. And we know from last month's board meeting, from our discussion there, that most of those UW grads who start as Wisconsin residents stay in Wisconsin. But how do they feel about our institutions after graduation, after a few years in the workplace when they're hopefully putting their education to good use? That's what this alumni survey will give us a lot of very good, interesting information about. In regard to ACE, I think many of you know that ACE represents presidents and chancellors of all types of accredited higher education institutions across the United States, including community colleges, four-year institutions from both the public and the private sectors. It represents the interests of more than 1,600 campus executives whose institutions combined serve more than 80% of today's college students. And both Chancellor Biddy Martin and I have the privilege of serving on the board of the American Council on Education. Terry is responsible for that organization's work with federal policymakers on a broad range of issues, including student aid, academic research, and government regulation. Prior to joining ACE in 1993, Terry served as Education Staff Director for the U.S. Senate Committee on Labor and Human Resources, which was then chaired, many of us will remember, by Senator Kennedy. Terry holds a doctorate in public policy from the George Washington University, and he has a Wisconsin connection. His wife is from Wisconsin. His mother-in-law lives in Mequon, so he gets a lot of extra credit from them for coming to Wisconsin in December. So we appreciate his making the trek from Washington to be with us today. Welcome, Terry.
Thank you very much, Kevin, for inviting me, and thank you, President Pruitt, for giving me the time to chat with you this morning about some of the many things that are going on in higher education. I particularly appreciate the chance to be here in December. I often tell people that December really is the best time to visit Wisconsin. Of course, I'm a lobbyist, so most people don't believe a thing I say anyway. Kevin, I can't help but noting they have a blanket here under the podium. I'm not really sure what that's for. It's not quite that cold yet, but I appreciate the sentiment. Okay, I'll do two things, as Kevin mentioned. I'll talk a little bit about the election, the national political environment in Washington, D.C., where higher education has been in federal policy in the last few years and where it's going. The federal government has fairly quickly become very important in American higher education, much more important than many people realize. The federal government this year will make about $150 billion available for student aid and scientific research that will be spent at college and university campuses. $150 billion. To put that in context, total state spending in higher education this year will be about $75 billion. The simple fact is American higher education would not look anything like what it does look like without the federal support that our institutions receive. So what the federal government chooses to do or not to do with respect to student aid and scientific research has a very big impact on all types of colleges and universities. But let me start just with some general, you want to call up the, there we are. Clicker doesn't seem to be clicking. Oh, there we are. Okay. In with the new, as you all know, we had an election last month that will result in significant changes in Congress. In the 111th Congress, the Congress that is stumbling toward the finish line as we speak, the Democrats had 225 members, the Republicans had 179 members. When Congress returns in January, the Democrats will have 193 seats in the House, the Republicans will have 242. It was day before yesterday that the final congressional race was decided. The Democrats actually won the last race, and it was, for higher education, an important one. It was Congressman Tim Bishop, who represents the eastern half of Long Island and was a former college and university president and has been very involved in higher education policy discussions since he got to Washington. All right. In the Senate, Senate Democrats, this Congress 56, they will have 51 in the new Congress. The Republicans will go from 42 to 47, and the Independents will remain at 2. They caucus with the Democrats. That's Bernie Sanders from Vermont and Joe Lieberman from Connecticut. They caucus with the Democrats, so the Democrats will, in essence, have 53 seats, not enough, anywhere near enough to shut off a filibuster. So the political calculus gets more complicated. A lot of election observations, and you can cut the data about what happened in the election lots of different ways, and people have been poring over it. I think three things are particularly notable. Family income less than $100,000 a year went for Democrats 49% to 48%. Family income over $100,000 a year, 58% went for Republicans, 40% went for Democrats. A very big difference in income. Essentially, the Democrats narrowly get the votes of families with incomes under $100,000, but get beaten pretty handily by families with incomes over $100,000. Education difference, considerable differences in the voting patterns based on education level. The Democrats won the votes of those who did not complete high school and those who completed graduate school. They lost everybody else. It's really a very odd sort of skewing of the data. So I guess the good news for the, I'm sure there's good news for the Democrats in here. I'm not quite sure what it is, but I guess the good news is they got a lock on people with postgraduate education. That segment of the electorate, no high school diploma or graduate work is 24% of the electorate. 76% of the electorate are high school graduates, some college or college graduates, and Republicans overwhelmingly win that group of voters. And finally, I think in many ways the simplest way to summarize what happened in the election is just to say what happened to independent voters. In 2006, a non-presidential election year, the year the Democrats took back control of the Senate, the Democrats got 57% of the votes from people who identified themselves as independents. The Republicans got 39%. This time around, non-presidential election year, Democrats got 38% of the votes from independents. Republicans got 56%. In other words, independents over 4 years almost completely switched. The numbers are basically 57 to 38. 4 years ago, that was the Democrats enjoyed the majority. This election, the Republicans enjoyed the majority. So as the independents went, so went the election. Let me talk a little bit about what's going on, I think, as we sift through this data more carefully. One thing is simply that a trend we've noticed really going back to the Carter administration, this is a trend that's lasted more than a generation, is the public's growing dissatisfaction with the political process. It's probably not too much an exaggeration to point back to Vietnam and Watergate and to say that we started losing the public's connection to the political arena at that point, and we've never got it back. So what we have is increasing distrust of elected officials. We have growing skepticism of the effectiveness about the effectiveness of government activities, and a conviction that elites are running the show for themselves and not for the average voter. As I said, this is not brand new. It's perhaps a little bit more pronounced now than it has been in the past, but we've seen this for quite some time. Really only two presidents in the last generation have coped successfully with this, President Reagan and Bill Clinton, at least Bill Clinton after the 1994 election. Seemed to understand this and to be able to work around it. It's not just a sense that the public is unhappy. Much of the public has reason to. Over the last decade, median family income in the U.S. has fallen by 9%, and the percentage of people living in poverty has gone up about 30%. 10 million more Americans living in poverty now than there were in 2000. Obviously, in 2000, we had a very healthy economy. It was something of a bubble, but the economy was humming along quite nicely. But it's not too much to say that for millions of our fellow citizens, the last decade was a lost decade, and their lives did not improve the way it did for most people who were fortunate enough to have a college degree or more, most upper-income families. So what we hear a lot these days in focus groups and talking to voters is that they think things are rigged against them. They think that, to sort of paraphrase Al Gore, it's the people versus the powerful. This is not exactly a new sentiment in American society, but with the economic stagnation that many middle-income Americans have seen over the last decade, it has become more pronounced. This is obviously something of a populist feeling. It's not new in American politics. We've gone through populist eras before. Most notably, probably the 1890s to 1910 was quite a populist era. But I think there's a big difference here. That earlier era was sort of the oppressed worker versus the corporate interests. And government was seen as something that would intervene on the side of the workers. Today, I think what we're looking at is that the public is just afraid or distrustful of large institutions that have too much authority and too little responsibility. Too much authority, too little responsibility for what they do. So the public is very angry at Wall Street. The public was very angry at BP, and the public is pretty angry about the federal budget deficit. And why are they angry about these things? Because I think to the public these seem like evidence of institutional recklessness that could very easily make big and lasting negative changes in our society. So it's not terribly surprising that the Public is unhappy. Elites are suspect. People that seem to have done well over the last decade, regardless of how you define them, seem to many Americans to be suspect. And it includes post-secondary educational institutions. Many of our institutions, most of our institutions see themselves as gateway to opportunity, as the best thing the nation has to boost economic opportunity at the individual level and to generate social progress. And I think that for the publics, the evidence would suggest that we are greatly admired and respected. But we also establish and validate privilege. And I think in a populist era, that's something that the public is a little skeptical of, a little worried about. And I think one of the risks for American colleges and universities is that we don't appreciate the level of discontent and fear that the average American voters might be facing. Certainly college communities are great places, and people like to be part of it, but it's a little bit of a bubble. And I think we have to be ever mindful that for many Americans, as I said earlier, the last decade could be characterized as a lost decade. Last 2 years in federal policy about higher education, let's talk about higher education a little bit now directly, were very good for higher education. The Obama administration and Congress did a great deal to increase federal investment in higher education. And when they increase federal investment in higher education, they're essentially providing more student aid money to individuals. This administration believes intuitively that higher education is the nation's best hope for economic progress and social opportunity, and I think probably believes it more intuitively and more firmly than any other industry that we've, any other administration that I've worked with. Having said that, I think this administration also believes a little too firmly that they can micromanage higher education from Washington, D.C. to get the socially desirable outcomes that we all want. So the administration has been willing to put a lot more money into higher education, but they've also been willing to follow that up with a lot of regulations that might look good in theory, but do not look very good when they get to the individual campus level. But over the last 2 years, 4 big federal policy changes. First, Pell Grant increases. In academic year 2007-2008, in other words, the academic year before the 2008 election, the Pell Grant program had a maximum grant of $4,730. 5.6 million students got Pell Grants. That's out of 18 million. And the program cost taxpayers $16 billion. As a result of the increases we've seen in the last couple of years, in the coming academic year 2011-2012, maximum grant will be $55.50, so up about $800. The program will serve 8.7 million students, so going from 5.6 to 8.7. And the program cost to the taxpayers will be $35 billion. In other words, in roughly 4 years, we've gone from $16 billion to $35 billion. That is a very big increase in a very short period of time. And I think if, as Congress looks at the budget and says, you know, where do we need to trim things, what's been going on, why is the deficit going up so fast, one of the things they're likely to look at is that increase in the Pell Grant program. Indeed, it would be the same thing any of us would do at the individual level. If we're trying to cut expenses, we'd look at things that we'd increase spending on dramatically in the last couple of years and say, why did this happen? Is this a good idea? Do we need to make a change? So I've said to some people that the Pell Grant program can, to some members of Congress, appear out of control. In reality, there are good reasons why the Pell Grant program increased so much. One is that they increased the maximum grant. The second is they made more people eligible. And third, enrollment in higher education has surged. We're now at about 19.5 million students in American higher education. Kevin mentioned a few minutes ago that your enrollment at the UW campuses has never been higher. That's essentially true across the U.S. 19.5 million students means America has far more students in college than we have in high school. not exactly what you expect to see. Over the last decade, enrollment in American higher education has increased by 5 million students. So what we're seeing here is a broad social trend. The Pell Grant is very much a part of that. But as I said, it's gone from $16 billion to $35 billion in a very short period of time. Second big development in the last couple of years is the American Opportunity Tax Credit. This is a tax credit that replaces the HOPE tax credit. It was put in place by President Clinton and Congress in 1999. It is far more generous than the HOPE tax credit. It provides up to a $2,500 a year tax credit, and it's partially refundable, meaning that if you're so poor that you don't pay income taxes, you can still benefit to a certain extent from the tax credit. The credit was scheduled to expire at the end of this year. The tax deal that the President and congressional Republicans have struck will continue this tax credit for another 2 years. Third big change in higher education policy in Washington the last couple of years is that fairly smoothly the federal government moved from a bank-based student loan program to the federal direct student loan programs. All federal student loans now originate from the U.S. Department of Education. It did not used to be that way. Indeed, 3 years ago, 70% of loans were originated by banks and other private lenders. Now, every student loan in the country comes from the U.S. Department of Education. Now, previously, student loans would not have been made without the U.S. Department of Education, but this simply means that the responsibility for running the student loan program is 100% in the hands of the U.S. Department of Education, and so far things have gone very well. We've seen efforts in the past where federal agencies tried to implement things that were supposed to benefit students, like the post-9/11 GI Bill, that didn't go very smoothly. This was actually a very smooth transition to direct lending. And finally, it's not just student aid. This administration has significantly increased funding for the National Institutes of Health and the National Science Foundation. Most of that funding will be spent on college and university campuses. Funding for NIH over the last 2 years went from $29.5 billion to $32 billion, and funding for the National Science Foundation went from $6 to $7.5 billion. Remember, NSF goes back to the 1950s, and we've seen $1.5 billion increase in funding for that agency just in the last 2 years. So I think the one thing we can say about this administration is that they have made investment in scientific research and student aid a priority, and they have delivered. The drawback is that they also think they can and should, as a result of putting this money into higher education, have more say over what happens to it on campuses, and they want to regulate colleges and universities to a greater degree than we've seen before. 3 key words as we look for the future: partisan. I don't think things are going to get less partisan in Washington, D.C. than they have been. There's some hope that we've reached a point where the administration and congressional Republicans realize that they have to work together, they have to find common ground to govern. But I think that the partisanship is likely to continue going forward. I don't think it's going to be reduced from what it was. We have been in this period before where the presidency and one house of Congress are controlled by one party, the other house of Congress is controlled by the other party. It was in the Reagan administration. The Republicans controlled the White House and the Senate. The Democrats controlled the Congress. For much of that area, they're still managed to work together, but I think there was an underlying willingness of people like Tip O'Neill and Ronald Reagan to compromise to get things done. They were very capable of taking highly partisan ideological positions, but they would also, at the end of the day, work to get things done. It's not clear whether we will get to that point with this makeup of Congress and the White House for the next couple of years. Second, the deficit. You may have heard we have a slight cash flow problem in Washington, D.C. Deficit is $1.4 trillion. I don't know how to put $1.4 trillion in context. There is no way to do it. The one example I use is to say that last year The federal income tax receipts, the amount of income tax paid by all Americans, was $1.2 trillion. What this means is that if we doubled the income tax paid by all Americans, we still would not be operating in the black. That is the size of the hole that we find ourselves in now. There is going to be a great deal of attention, I think, to the budget deficit. There were actually sort of two major developments, I think, in Washington over this month so far. The first was the release of the Simpson-Bowles report on the size of the federal deficit, outlining a set of pretty strong steps to get the deficit under control. And the conventional wisdom after the report was released was this was terrific, that this was going to change the discussion. The budget deficit would certainly be front and center in policy makers' minds going forward. And then about 10 days later, the Republicans and President Obama reached a deal on the tax cuts that will add $900 billion to the deficit. So despite the Simpson-Bowles report, we are moving the wrong way still. We're not making efforts to narrow the budget deficit. Indeed, the total size of the tax cut package is about $900 billion, which means that it is worth more than the economic stimulus package. It's a larger package than the economic stimulus package was. And finally, election. The 2012 presidential election. Every cycle we get to a new presidential election, it starts earlier, and it will start quite early this time around. The conventional wisdom is that the president has got a great deal of difficulties. His situation, frankly, looks much like the situation President Clinton was in 1994 after he lost control of Congress. He was reduced at one point to telling the press corps that he was still relevant, and he swept to re-election in 1996. So I wouldn't make any initial judgments about it, but the jockeying, the political gamesmanship, is going to start very, very quickly. And I suspect the key will be how much work they get done in the first 6 to 9 months of 2011, because I think certainly once you get to 2012, it's all about the election. So partisan, deficit, and election, three key words. Three key questions. Question number one, can Republicans govern? The Republicans have done, as they often do, a very good job of defining the issues, appealing to the public to change things in Washington, but it's not clear that the Republicans will be able to govern. They do not control both houses of Congress. The Republican Party is somewhat split between mainstream conservatives and the Tea Party conservatives. They did not, as they did in 1994, lay out a point-by-point agenda of what they wanted to do if they took control. Remember, they laid out in 1994 the contract with America, and very quickly they carried through on their promise and voted on every item in that list. They didn't do that this time around. And so now they sort of have to figure, how are we going to make ourselves responsible to move forward? How can we demonstrate that having one measure of authority in Washington, we can lead in a constructive way? Second question for the next couple of years is whether or not the president can regain his edge. If I had been speaking to you 2 years ago, I would have been saying this guy can't do anything wrong. Today it sometimes looks as if this guy can't do anything right. Neither one is the case. It's just that politics has a lot to do with luck, and the president was very lucky in the 2008 election. He has not been so lucky for the last year. His potential difficulty now is that he needs to move to the middle of the political spectrum, and this is likely to alienate the liberal base of the Democratic Party. Indeed, the pushback, the expressions of opposition to the tax cut deal that has just been announced are coming from liberal Democrats. They're not coming from anywhere else. So the president needs to keep his political base happy, but he also needs to move to the middle of the spectrum, the political spectrum, to get anything done in the coming years. Bill Clinton was masterful at this. Whether or not President Obama will be able to do that remains to be seen. The way that we characterize Bill Clinton's ability to to move to the middle was to point to 1996 welfare reform, which was very vigorously opposed by liberal Democrats, and the president still signed it anyway. Whether or not Obama will have the same skill at triangulation as Bill Clinton developed is something that we'll find out over the next year or so. And third question is simply, can they work together? Certainly, you wouldn't want to put a whole lot of betting on the fact that they could work together, having watched the last 4 or 6 years. But as the problems facing our country become more acute, more serious, the need for them to work together grows ever greater. Indeed, the vast majority of Republicans and the vast majority of Democrats, when polled, say that it is very important that the parties work together to accomplish things for the country. But a lot of what drives both parties are the far ends of their parties, the most liberal or progressive Democrats, the most conservative Republicans. I think John Boehner is someone who has demonstrated repeatedly in the past an ability to work across party lines. He really is a politician in the best sense of the word, is somebody who starts with a point of view and very strong principles, but at the end of the day wants to do things to make the country better. And the question is whether he'll have the sort of flexibility that he needs to be able to work with the Obama administration. The Obama administration, as I mentioned, has to keep their progressive base happy, but they have to move to the center. And, of course, the U.S. Senate is, as always, a mess. We're still in the situation in the Senate where you need 60 votes to do just about anything. The Democrats are much further from 60 votes than they were. The Democrats will be much further from 60 votes than they are right now. So that's, in a nutshell, what I think is going on in Washington, how we interpret the election, where higher education has been in federal policy, and what we're looking at for the next couple of years. And I would be happy to stop here. If there are questions, I'd be happy to take them. And if not, we can move on. Yes, ma'am.
Fascinating presentation. Thank you so much. You said a couple of times that the Obama administration, while financially supporting and putting their money where their mouth is, that's not your words, it's mine, to support higher ed, with that has come strings attached and regulations, la, 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 la. Can you tell me or tell us some major examples of what gives you that concern?
Sure. Unfortunately, it's all too easy to tell you what some concerns are. In regulations published at the end of October, the U.S. Department of Education has just federalized the definition of credit hour. There will now be a federal definition of credit hour. This is the most basic building block of a college or university is credit hour. And we define credit hours based on the nature of the institution and the individual programs. And the federal government, in its wisdom, has said, we're going to define it for you. And I think this is a very ominous step because the federal government has historically stayed away from the academic side of the enterprise. People like Kevin and me have helped keep them away from the academic side of the enterprise. But when you start federalizing things, definitions like credit hour, it gets to a point that you think they're not staying away from the academic side anymore. So I think that's one example. Second example, federal government has just published regulations dealing with incentive compensation. The thing that they're trying to prevent is they're trying to prevent for-profit schools from recruiting students and just paying the admissions or sales staff purely on a commission basis. But unfortunately, the way they've drafted the regulations, it looks like it will force all traditional colleges and universities to review their compensation plans to make sure that they will legally survive. For example, if you have a college or university president whose contract includes a bonus if enrollments go up, it's very common, particularly at traditional nonprofit private colleges, We're not sure that's legal anymore. So, here they are sort of getting in and telling us how we can pay staff members. Don't get me wrong, there was a very big problem that has to be fixed. But sometimes you can overshoot the mark a little bit. Third example I'll give you is that those same regulations included a provision that will give state governments more control over private colleges and universities. And if there's one thing that upsets private colleges and universities, it's the notion of state bureaucrats having control over them. The people who are most worried about that turn out to be Christian colleges and universities because they think they have a very distinct mission, they have a very distinct role, and they do not want some state bureaucrat coming in and saying, we think you ought to alter this academic program. Obviously, for public colleges and universities, not quite as big a deal because they have such a close relationship with the states as it is. But for private college and universities, yeah, that's a big worry. There'll be a great deal of discussion sometime early next year when the Department of Education drops out their so-called gainful employment regulations. These are designed to ensure that students who get a post-secondary education earn enough money to repay their student loans. Very complicated, very detailed new reporting requirements that will affect 53,000 programs at individual colleges and universities. It doesn't necessarily affect all the institution, but it affects about 53,000 individually identifiable programs. So a lot of micromanaging coming here, a lot of getting close to the academic side of the enterprise. Yes, sir.
Well, I just want to say, Jeff, before you jumped in to the chancellors and provosts on the second regulation that Terry mentioned, there goes our Christmas bonus.
Well, maybe not because the...
Just kidding. We're just kidding.
Yeah. Regulation takes effect July 1, so enjoy that Christmas bonus this year. You won't get it next year. Yes, sir.
Jeff.
You observed that a vast segment of the public are distrustful of those that they perceive to be rich and powerful and large institutions and so on, and particularly you mentioned higher education. Is there evidence of that the public distrusts higher education institutions, public institutions, for example?
No, the evidence would suggest just the opposite, that the public retains a great degree of confidence in some social institutions, including the military, organized religion, and colleges and universities. But the public's enthusiasm for those large institutions is dropping across the board. It is not in any way that higher education is being singled out. It is that we are just large institutions, and the public, for some very good reasons right now, seems fairly skeptical of large institutions. I think one of the things that interested me in the when Sonia Sotomayor was being confirmed for the Supreme Court was any number of analysts pointed out that if she was confirmed, it would mean we would now have a Supreme Court composed of justices who had just gone to Harvard or Yale. And this was presented as a bad thing. Well, the fact is most of the Supreme Court justices started from modest circumstances, went to these institutions, and became Supreme Court justices. We used to regard this as an American success story, that this was the transforming power of higher education. But there was sort of an underlying suggestion that just having justices from two of the best law schools in the world might not be a good thing because these are large elite institutions. And I'd never seen that sort of emphasis before, and I think it's just something we need to be aware of, that the public, especially the folks who have had a rough decade, are distrustful of all large institutions. They think the game is rigged against them. They're worried about elites. And we, more than anything in this country, validate the elites. First of all, I'm not sure very many people have realized that that's the situation we're in. And we're in that situation because of adult students. We have the average age of a college student in the United States is now about 27. So it's a very different student body than it was a generation ago. And I think it's actually one of the strengths of higher education is that we have figured out a way to accommodate individuals who want to learn throughout their lives, at whatever point in their lives they are. I think you're absolutely right. We've done a lot of economic impact analyses. I sort of have the intuitive feeling that policymakers have internalized that to the extent that they're going to internalize it. In other words, they sort of know it, but it's no longer necessarily enough as far as they're concerned. So I think we do need to continue to talk about the impact of higher education on communities, on states, but we need to be continually searching for new metrics. And remember, the debate has changed in the last couple of years, in part, again, because of the president. The president has established this bold goal. He wants us to be first in the world in college attainment by 2020. That's where we were in 2000. We're not going to get there because as a society we won't organize ourselves to do the things that are necessary to get us there. Would we be better off if we did? You bet. But getting there will take a great deal of work, and I don't think that we're going to make it. Nobody really disputes the president's goal. Even in this highly partisan environment, nobody says, that's a stupid goal. We shouldn't aim for the moon. We shouldn't really try that sort of a big goal. What I've been surprised at in Washington is how quickly that idea that we ought to focus on completion, graduation, retention of students has become a part of the dialogue. For a generation, the focus in Washington has purely been on access to higher education, getting people in the door. And in 2 years, getting them out the door with a degree or a certificate or some recognition of what they've done has become almost as important. Not quite, but pretty close. So I think that graduation rates, which we as a country do not do a very good job of calculating, are about to become even more important than they have been in the past. You had a question, sir.
Going from 16 billion to 35 billion reflects need and also
I'm sorry, I don't. I just haven't looked at those numbers. It would be numbers you could get, but don't actually have those.
also
Yeah, I think Mr. Obey is one of my heroes. I think Mr. Obey is a terrific member of Congress. He gave a speech yesterday, and I was reflecting as he was giving it how much we're going to miss him for his willingness to confront hard truths and to say exactly what was on his mind. NIH has had bipartisan support on Capitol Hill. Particularly from, in the Senate, from Senator Tom Harkin, from Senator Arlen Specter, and in the House from Dave Obey. And two of those three have now left. Senator Specter was defeated in his bid for re-election, and of course, Congressman Obey has stepped down. So I think you talk to a lot of members of Congress, and they do know that NIH has gone up a lot in a fairly short period of time, and there's sort of a view that maybe we ought to put money into something else now. So I think that there is quite a possibility that funding for those agencies will be harder to come by going forward. NSF Not so much. That really wasn't Mr. Obie's thing. It wasn't Specter or Harkin's thing. I mean, they intuitively believed basic research was a good thing, but I don't think they were the drivers on that particular agency.
One more, and then we'll have to move to the alumni survey. Tom.
President Obama gave a speech. President Obama gave a speech, and then there was a meeting in Washington on community and two-year colleges. And the general focus was these graduation rates or degree conferring rates are way too low. We have to do something. Then it seemed to disappear. What is the follow-up on that initiative?
I think you've put your finger on a very interesting point. The administration, as part of the economic stimulus package, wanted a very substantial amount of funding that they could direct to community colleges to transform the institutions, to really provide, in essence, general aid to community colleges to help them focus on boosting their completion and graduation rates. They did not get that in the economic stimulus package for sort of parliamentary reasons. The consolation prize was that the Obama administration found a program in the Department of Labor that had been created a few years ago but had never been funded. So they parked a couple $2 billion in that program and said this will be our community college initiative, and we'll have a community college summit at the White House. So, you know, there's something about that that had the feel of a consolation prize. Now, having said that, because that's really what it had the feel of, I think this administration would love to help community colleges if they could just figure out a way to do it. Remember, federal student aid does not go to the institutions. It goes to individuals. There is really no mechanism to provide direct support for community colleges, two-year institutions, in public policy, and what the Obama administration wanted to do was create one. They couldn't do that, so they parked the money in this other program that is for very specific purposes. As we look at retention and graduation rates, community colleges are the one place that everybody says, you know, we really need to do a better job here. Now, having said that, community colleges don't necessarily exist to get people a degree, and a lot of people go to community colleges never expecting to get a degree. And the way we calculate graduation rates in this country significantly understates the percentage of students who have a successful experience at a community college. If you go to a community college for a year and transfer to a 4-year UW campus, even if all your credits transfer, you are counted as a dropout for that community college because we can't track students nationwide from campus to campus. And I think if we had accurate graduation rates, you'd see that the graduation rates of community colleges, two-year institutions, would be between, the success rates would be between 10 and 15 percentage points higher. So community colleges are absolutely critical. We are not going to come close to the President's goals without community colleges producing more graduates. And I want to be very careful that I say producing more graduates because it's fairly easy to increase graduation rates. You just control your intake a little bit. You just admit students that you think are pretty good bets to finish. So we could increase our graduation rates fairly easily, but it would probably mean denying an awful lot of people a shot at an education that might benefit them enormously. Yes, the summit was held. Yep. It was chaired by Jill Biden, the Vice President's wife, and everybody who went to the summit thought it was terrific that they had been put in the spotlight and the attention had been focused on them. But the fact of the matter is most summits really result in a short-term image boost and not a long-term change in public policy or behavior. It is not the nature of the community college summit. It is the nature of any White House summit. It's designed to highlight a program, but it doesn't necessarily change the direction of policy.
All right. I know we have other questions, but given the usual region meeting time press, I'm going to have to ask Terry to move us on into the alumni survey section of his remarks.
What I'm about to give you is complete, unambiguous, total good news. I realize this is not something that you always get at Regents meetings. But if what I tell you doesn't put a smile on your face, nothing will. Okay. We did a survey of young alumni just to find out what they thought of their academic experience. A lot of questions about whether or not college is worth it, whether or not students are learning anything, what the outcomes are. It occurred to us that the best way to find out what people thought about a college education, what the outcomes were, whether it was worth it, was to ask people who had spent the time and money. If you spend a lot of time and a lot of money, you intuitively know whether something was worthwhile or not. So why don't we ask people and see what they tell us? We did a national survey and got pretty good results from that we were very pleased with. And then, as a result of discussions with Kevin and other members of the ACE board, we decided to see what this would look like if we went to individual institutions and asked them to help us survey their alums. So instead of just a national survey, what if we tried this alumni satisfaction survey with individual institutions? And so a number of institutions on the ACE board agreed to give us a list of young alumni that we could call with a brief survey. The institutions that did this had to pay for it, and so not everybody did it, but 22 institutions eventually did. They're all members of the ACE board. And again, this was just sort of an effort to find out if this was doable. This was not intended to be a comprehensive national undertaking. But we got 22 participating institutions, and we surveyed young alumni. Young alumni defined as people who had been out between 5 and 15 years. In other words, they received their bachelor's degree as recently as 5 years ago or as far as 15 years ago. We didn't want to get people who thought back about their college experiences with rose-colored glasses. We didn't want people who'd been out for a long time because we thought, frankly, they might not have been remembered the ups and downs of a college experience as much as more recent alums. They probably remembered a lot of the ups. At least that was our theory. And we didn't want to get very recent college graduates because we figured they might not be in a position to really make a judgment on whether it was worth it or not. They might be continuing their education, for example, and they might still be hacked off about the library fine they had to pay before they got their diploma. So we wanted recent graduates, young alumni, and we asked for a list from institutions of people who graduated between 5 and 15 years ago. In Wisconsin, 11 of the 13 four-year institutions agreed to participate in the survey. Thanks to Kevin's leadership, he approached all of the campuses and asked them to participate, and 11 of the 13 agreed to do so. Again, they had to pay to do this. There are no two-year schools in this sample because we discovered that the two-year schools did not maintain their alumni data in a way that would make it easily accessible to survey the recipients. And this is often the case with two-year institutions. Two-year institutions don't necessarily focus on alumni the way four-year schools do. So it's a little harder to do this with two-year schools, although we did get some two-year schools in our sample. Let me just set what I'm going to show you in confidence, in context. Every year Gallup does a public confidence poll, and they ask the public how much confidence they have in large institutions. And let me just give you some of the numbers so that when we go through and look at the questions with the young alumni, you'll see how they stack up. In the most recent Gallup Public Confidence Poll, this was in July 2010, 76% of Americans expressed a great deal or some confidence in the military. That's the highest. 76%, great deal or some. Small business got 66%. Police, 59%. Church, organized religion, 48%. The medical system got 40%. Newspapers were at 25%. Good news for newspapers is they were ahead of banks. They were at 23%. TV news was at 22%. And Congress was at 11%. Kind of makes you wonder about that 11%, doesn't it? Okay. Do you have a favorable impression of the institution you attended? Nationally, 88% of recent college graduates have a favorable impression of their alma mater. At the UW system, the numbers range between 93 and 98%. Pollsters will tell you anything above 85% is essentially unanimous. You could find 10% that don't like the American flag. These are stunning numbers. The guy who did this for us is a friend of mine whose primary job is political polling. He does polling for Republicans, and he called me up when he first got the data and said, you know, you guys are just nuts, because I've got clients who would kill for numbers half this good. Now, if you knew his clients, you'd understand why. But you know, a political pollster looks at this and says, you have numbers like this and you're not, you know, putting them on the front page of every advertisement you're doing? What is wrong here? These are people who spend a lot of time, a lot of money, and they love you. Gets better. We asked people if colleges are prepared to meet the challenges of the future. Young alumni nationwide, 61% said yes. That's still a very high number. In Wisconsin, the numbers were between 72 and 78%. These are your young alumni. This is not an economy that has flourished in the last 15 or 20 years. And they believe, based on their experience, that four-year institutions are prepared to meet the challenges of the future. In some cases, we've got as high as 78% saying that they're prepared to meet the challenges of the future. Similar question, are institutions preparing students for the modern workforce? Nationwide, 62% say yes. That's two-thirds. Look at the numbers for the UW system. They're consistent and in most cases considerably above 62%, as high as 72%. How well did your college experience prepare you for your current job? Nationally, 85% of college students said that it exceptionally or more than adequately or adequately prepared them for their current job. 85%. UW numbers are generally very, very high. There are a couple of institutions where it's a little bit below the national average for whatever reason. But the fact of the matter is it's very high. Exceptionally or more than adequately, 48%. 55%, more than half of the graduates say that it exceptionally or more than adequately prepared them for their current job. This is the bottom line question. There actually are a couple of bottom line questions. This is one of them. Would you attend the same school? Nationwide, 79% of college graduates say, yeah, they'd attend the same school. In Wisconsin, the numbers range between 68 and 92% say they would go to the same school all over again. Upper 80s, mid 80s, low 80s. Remember the pollsters, everything over 85 is essentially unanimous. It doesn't get better than this. This is one that made some presidents uneasy when we first talked about asking it. Did your college charge a fair price? 76% nationwide said that their alma mater charged a fair price. But look at the numbers for Wisconsin. Every one of your institutions is well above the national average. The closest is 86%. Again, 85% essentially unanimous. Now, keep in mind, these are people who are recent alumni. These are not necessarily the people who saw the big tuition increases that you had to put in place a couple years ago. And so that number, if we were to run this on very recent alumni, might change. If we run the survey 5 years from now, we might see very different numbers. But as of a couple years ago, your alumni, your young alumni, thought the price was fair. By the way, we asked young alumni, did your college or university charge a fair price in the national survey? And 76% said yes. And we asked them in the same survey, do all colleges and universities charge a fair price? And 34% said yes. This is sort of, I hate Congress, but I love my congressman. The more you know about the institution, the more directly you experienced it, the more you think it was worthwhile. And here's our bottom line question. Given the time and money, was your college education worth it? Nationwide, 89% said yes. And look at the numbers for your campuses. With one exception, they're all above 90%. So, as I said, clear, unambiguous, good news. 4 messages we take from this. The obvious one is exceptional levels of alumni satisfaction, very strong favorables for colleges and universities. What we learned in this survey from some of the data that I haven't presented and from our national survey is that more and more young alumni are saying the employment focus is critical. This is not surprising because everyone is very concerned about employments and jobs. Young alumni would be no different than anyone else. This is something that we believe does spike up in economic downturns and lowers off a little bit when the economy recovers. And finally, there's probably some price affordability vulnerability. People think their school charges a fair price. They don't think other schools charge a fair price. We've been through a period, not just in Wisconsin, where we've seen some very significant tuition increases around the country. These are my national messages. They are not particularly focused on the UW system. My message for the UW system is keep doing what you're doing. The folks who spend a lot of time and money to get what you provide are real happy. I'll stop there.
Great. Questions, reactions for Terry? Here's the American Council on Education will have a national press teleconference on Monday to release the national data, and I'll be part of that with Terry and Molly Broad, the president of ACE. And I think we have to figure out ways to use this data now in Wisconsin and nationally. And I think it's really important for the governor-elect, for our legislators as they come in to start the new session, their new configuration, to be aware of this. I mean, this is direct data from their constituents in every district around the state saying how important the UW experience they've had, how positive it's been and important it's been in their lives. And I think that's a message that, we've often tried to send, but we have some hard data here based on what individuals who've gone through the process, spent the money, as Terry said, think of the education they got. And it's great news for us, I think.
Yeah, I think this is a question that we at ACE and the higher education organizations need to think about, is whether or not we can, by doing things like this with individual institutions, help them validate their outcomes. All institutions would have some data like this from their own surveys of their alumni, but the questions are not really designed for national release, and frankly, if they're produced by the institution, nobody's going to trust them as much as they might otherwise. So I don't think that the results here would necessarily surprise any sitting presidents who talk with their recent alums. The extent to which they're off the charts might, because this is, you get to a point where you're saying, well, gosh, that school's at 85%, the other school's at 79%. Why is that other school so low? 79% is not low. We do know, of course, I presented these as the 11 campuses as A through K. Obviously, I know exactly which ones are which, and so does Kevin. Our agreement with the institutions was that we would not release the institutions' data, that would be up to them. And, of course, all of the UW campuses knew that their data would be completely public upon doing this. So very soon, Monday, actually, you'll be able to get the data from UW. But, as I said, the news you get in these meetings does not get better than this. And this is just an extraordinary endorsement of what an awful lot of hardworking people on your campuses have been doing and continue to do. So kudos to the leadership and the faculty of your institutions. Yes, sir.
I assume that the percentage of responses was statistically significant.
Yes.
How did the percentage of responses from Wisconsin compare to the national response percentage?
That information I don't have here. We had to get, I think the number we were searching for was 5%, and the margin of error, we were looking for 500, and I think the margin of error was 4%. One of the things that we realized in doing this is that if we wanted to go forward with it, we'd have to figure out a better mechanism to survey survey alumni, because phone numbers don't work very well anymore. And we had to get from the institutions a very large sample to get enough people that we could reach via a phone number to respond to the survey. This is obviously not just a problem for higher education. The survey and the marketing research people are all struggling with how we reach out to people of a certain age who may not have a landline at home. And we're just going to have to sort of work that way through it.
Comment on the last price. The price affordability, vulnerability. You follow the new UK government trying to make an argument that people should pay, or students should pay, and families should pay more tuition, and then trying to minimize the impact by saying you wouldn't pay off your loans until your income reached a certain, very complicated thing. There seems to be some price affordability vulnerability there with protests.
Yeah. Yeah, I would say when they're attacking Prince Charles's car, that's probably not a good sign. It's pretty hard to imagine a bunch of British guys attacking Prince Charles's car, isn't it?
Yeah.
No, it's, well, remember, 10 years ago, they didn't have any tuition in the UK. And now they're talking about going pretty much to full price cost. This is a huge difference. This is a problem that all higher education systems in the industrialized world have faced. It's easy to maintain public sector low tuition when you have a small system of higher education than when you get to a mass system. And that's sort of the dilemma that we've faced. When you couple that in the U.S. with increasing expenditures at state level for Medicaid, elementary, secondary education, and corrections, public higher education has just been hammered. And we now have a number of states where flagship universities get 7 or 8% of their funding from the state government. I know one president who told me he used to say he was state supported, then he was state located, and now he's state hassled. And I had a conversation with one president from a major household name public university, and I said to him, this is about a year ago, are you just devastated by state budget cuts? And he said, no, it's not too bad. And I said, how come? And he said, well, I get 8% of my budget from the state. I have a $1.2 billion budget. It's $80 million. I don't want to lose it, but even if I lose half of it, it's not the end of the world for my institution. So we really have reached a point where many household name public universities are really just sort of located in a state under the control of the state, but expected to financially support themselves. That works if you're a household name university. It doesn't work so well if you are not. And I think that the rapidly rising price of higher education, especially in the public sector, is one of the biggest worries I have about our ability to get even close to the President's goal, because we can price higher education out of reach. Ironically, it doesn't look that way. I mean, the fact of the matter is, you've had a decade of very big tuition increases. Kevin and I were just talking about this yesterday, and enrollment at your campuses has never been higher. So right now, it's hard to argue that rationally your campuses are overpriced. But individuals think this is essential to their future, their well-being, their family's well-being. And I think Americans as a group, when they see something as essential, think that are predisposed to think that any cost is too much. And as costs continue to go up, I think the public will be increasingly unhappy and concerned.
Well, I think we can all see why, given Terry's breadth and depth of understanding of the federal scene and its relationship to American higher education of all types, he's one of the most sought-after speakers and advisors around the country on these issues, and I'm very pleased he was willing to take the time today and join us on these two big, important topics. Great job. Thank you, Terry.
Yes, thank you. I just wanted to note that I think it was probably a necessary fact of living in Wisconsin. We spend a lot of time staring at our shoes and sort of feeling sort of modest. But I just thought that potentially this board, to our chancellors and provosts and representing the 40,000 plus employees of this university, if you look at these survey data, I think we owe them a round of applause for all the work. I also just wanted to make one introduction. We are joined today and wanted to welcome Jason Collada. Jason is the policy advisor to Governor-elect Walker's transition team. Jason, welcome. We really are obviously looking forward to working with you in the transition and with your boss in the transition and in the months and years ahead, and thank you for joining us. We really appreciate it. We will now go to our regular agenda, and we'll begin with the report of the Education Committee. Regent Craig.
It was a great start to the morning, and I would like to report on what was a very interesting meeting of the Education Committee yesterday. Most of it did not require action, but we talked about a number of important issues, as you will have seen in the materials that you received ahead of time. Our administrative leader, Rebecca Martin, was not with us yesterday. She is with us today, and we're very glad that she has had such successful surgery, and obviously her leadership was important in the preparation of these items. We were very capably led yesterday in that regard by Stephen Collison and Rebecca Karoff, and we appreciate it very much. We began yesterday with a presentation from the UW-Madison Provost DeLuca and others with him, who gave us a presentation on the Madison Initiative for Undergraduates, which they refer to as MIU. And with him were Aaron Brower, who is the Vice Provost for Teaching and Learning, and two students, Adam Sheka and Tom Templeton. This initiative is 2 years in. It's going very well and meeting its expectations. Provost DeLuca explained that half the MIU funds are distributed to need-based financial aid for undergraduates, and the other half goes to fund very interesting campus projects that are developed through a rigorous and competitive call for proposals. We heard a lot about that. Funding is being directed to hiring new faculty in high-demand areas, as well as to academic and career advising, academic and student support, and high-impact practices and innovation. The third round of proposal review is just now getting underway. The two students who were here were very articulate in describing the very significant student involvement in the decision-making process. And also impressive is the increased accountability involved in tracking the success for the funded projects. They're being monitored to ensure that they're meeting their goals and outcomes. It was a very good presentation. We then had a presentation on student success programs for populations of opportunity through high impact practices. And this was a very good follow-up to the Madison presentation. High impact practices, which are affectionately referred to as HIPs, are those educational practices that have been proven effective at deepening student learning and retention. Perhaps most exciting of all is that the HIPs are especially effective in improving the learning of historically underrepresented students, or in the context of the More Graduates Initiative, our populations of opportunity. We heard from Provost Fernando Delgado from UW River Falls, Provost Pat Klein from UW Eau Claire, and again from Aaron Brower of Madison. Each described campus projects focused on increasing participation of underrepresented students in specific high-impact practices. The results have been very impressive, in particular for how HIPs confront the achievement gap and succeed in closing it. The committee was excited by this work. We only heard of a few examples yesterday, but it's important to note that every one of our campuses is working on expanding their offering of HIPs and working to engage in them and thereby retain more of their underserved students. We had very active participation in this discussion, as with most of our others, with the provosts who were present from all campuses. And although we didn't say this specifically yesterday, it was implicit in the discussion that this work crystallizes the integration of some of the system's most important initiatives, LEAP, Inclusive Excellence, and more graduates for Wisconsin. At the end of the day, they're all about engaging, retaining, and graduating more of our students for the 21st century, for the work of the 21st century. Our next item was the annual program planning and review report. Associate Vice President Collison presented key findings from the 2009-10 annual program planning and review report. He reviewed the program activity in the last year and also summary data and trends from the last 5 years. There has been a slight uptick in the number of programs in the last couple of years, but in this discussion, with a good deal of input from the provost, there was a strong indication that the system is unlikely ever to go back to the peak of 1,200 programs that existed in the early 1980s. One of the key discussion points was, in fact, the extent to which most new academic programs being proposed and implemented are funded through differential tuition or a cost recovery model. Another indication of the very real challenges that we've been engaged in the last decade in the funding issues that are related to the system and the state. The current economic climate, we agreed, is unlikely to change that. Dr. Collison also reminded us of the program realignment initiative undertaken last year, resulting in guidance for addressing low-degree producing programs, and that is an ongoing topic of interest to the committee. We then heard reports from the Office of Operations Review and Audit. They were presented by Director Julie Gordon and her associate Josh Smith. The first report covered student evaluation of instruction. This was a very interesting report. And the Regent policy gives discretion to institutions in the implementation of this kind of evaluation. It's clear from the report that student evaluation of instruction is a very complicated endeavor, and there are several key issues at stake. the timing and frequency of conducting such evaluation, the work involved in doing so, and the variety of ways that these evaluations are used as part of faculty review for tenure and promotion and for improvement of instruction. The second report reviewed how the UW system awards credit for prior learning, that is to say how it conducts prior learning assessment. Prior learning assessment evaluates for college credit the knowledge and skills gained from life experiences outside the university, for instance, employment, military service, and other things. The report covered the objectives and potential benefits for students in institutions of prior learning assessment. It also detailed the variation of assessment methods used by our campuses, some of which currently award credit for prior learning more than others. There are a number of administrative and programmatic changes in doing this, including transfer and transcripting issues. As is standard practice for the Office of Operations Review and Audit, both of the reports contained a number of recommendations for UW System and the institutions. And our committee decided yesterday that we want to follow the model of the Business, Finance, and Audit Committee in asking that a management response document be prepared for the report on student evaluation of instruction and indicating a response to some of the report's recommendations. We thought that this was less necessary in the same sense anyway for the credit for prior learning report, given the fact that we also received an update from Associate Vice President Larry Rubin on the $800,000 grant for the system that has been received from the Lumina Foundation. This grant funding is going directly to further the development of prior learning assessment programming at our institutions and therefore thereby addressing many of the report's recommendations. This is the first time that our committee's been presented with results of operations review and audit reports, and we appreciated the opportunity. We thought that these were logically belonged in the Education Committee. And finally, the committee heard an abbreviated report from abbreviated because we always take up the time, and we did again yesterday. But we did hear a report from Associate Vice President Collison that covered two aspects of the UW System's sabbaticals program. First of all, the Regents received via email several days ago the assignments for those faculty who will take sabbatical in 2011 and 12. We receive this annually. It does not require our action. And secondly, every 2 years, the Education Committee reviews guidelines for the system's sabbatical program, and this is required by Regent policy. The guidelines recommend areas of emphasis or priority in institutional sabbatical decisions. But, however, they are not meant to be prescriptive, and everyone was clear yesterday that the authority for making sabbatical decisions rests with the faculty and the institutions. The committee did have, along with the provost, had an interesting discussion mostly about the process for reviewing the guidelines. We decided to maintain the existing guidelines for the next 2 years and to add reference to inclusive excellence as one of the system's priority areas. We also decided that in the fall of 2012, prior to the committee's next formal review of the guidelines, that we would like to engage in a different process, we being the collective we, whether we're here or not, one that allows for more time to rethink the guidelines and one that involves the provosts and probably the faculty representatives as well. We agreed that the guidelines need updating, but that it needs to take more time and be more intentional. So we have one item for the consent agenda, which is Resolution 11A2, which approves the amendments to the faculty personnel rules at UW-Oshkosh. The proper procedures were taken in this fairly minor adjustment in the personnel rules. So I will so move.
Is there a second?
Second.
Is there a discussion? If not, are you prepared to vote? If so, all those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That motion is carried.
That's the end of my report.
Thank you, Regent Crane. We now turn to the report of the Business, Finance, and Audit Committee. Regent Smith.
Thank you, President Pruitt. We first heard from UW-Madison Vice Chancellor Darrell Bazil on background on the institution's new Badger Partnership proposal for increased autonomy and flexibility from the state. Darrell indicated that additional flexibility would come with appropriate oversight. The committee had many questions and comments about the details of the proposal, and we were told that additional details and more specifics will be developed as we learn about the legislative and gubernatorial interest in the proposal. We then went to the Competitive University Workforce 2011-13 Unclassified Pay Plan Recommendations and Distribution Plan and Guidelines. And I think because of the importance of that, I think we wanted to make sure that you got directly from President Riley and Al Christ with regard to the presentation made to us here.
Very good. Thank you. Thank you, Regent Smith. And I wanted to say a few words pretty much along the lines of what I said to the Business, Finance, and Audit Committee yesterday, but for the full board to hear. And Al Christ will, I think, provide us with a few more of the details this morning as well, and then we can open it up for any questions or discussion you might have. Just to give this a little context, back in August, you'll recall, we asked the board to approve an operating budget request for the 11-13 biennium, and that request has since been submitted to the Department of Administration in September. In August, I said that our proposed budget was focused on things we thought we could do to help the state emerge from this economic slump in a stronger state than it went into it. To do that, I said we would need new investment from the state as well as increased management flexibility to make better use of our existing resources. So I want to repeat that message essentially today. Our goal is the same, to help revitalize the Wisconsin economy. To do that, we need resources and we need flexibility. It's important to remember why we're here today with the pay plan request at this time, and that's because state statute requires the board to do this. We didn't simply elect to do this. We are required to do this by the law. Just as the board recommends a biennial operating budget and a 2-year capital budget, now the board needs to submit a recommendation to the Office of State Employment Relations for adjusting compensation for our faculty and academic staff. You'll recall that we received some good advice on that issue from our Competitive University Workforce Commission that Regent Vice President Spector and Regent Falbo served on. Also on that commission, a good number, really the predominant group of business leaders from around the state, joined by our own faculty and academic staff reps, as well as some of our academic leaders. In addition to that commission's thorough review of our compensation situation, I also consulted with the President's Compensation Advisory Committee. This is a standing committee comprised of faculty and academic staff from each of the institutions across the system. So, as I said before, our goals have not changed. We want to produce more well-prepared college graduates and help create more better-paying jobs across the state. And as we've always said, we need a competitive UW workforce to reach those goals. Unlike most of our governmental entities in the state, the UW system really does compete in national and international markets for talent, for our employees. And like private sector businesses in that regard, our institutions of higher education feel the strong touch of what I'll call Adam Smith's invisible hand as they compete in this highly competitive free market. So at this time, I am recommending a pay plan request for 2% increases in each year of the 11-13 biennium to address merit and solid performance at a level that we estimate will be equal to increases given to faculty and staff at our peer universities. As the Competitive University Workforce Commission noted, our salaries are already lagging those earned by faculty and staff at peer universities, and by significant margins in many cases. Our pay plan request, this 2% request, will not close that gap, but a 2% pay plan, we hope, will keep that gap from widening further. Along with other recommendations from this board, including the elimination of mandatory unpaid furloughs and restoration of previously approved pay plans, this 2% pay plan will begin to address some of our strategic compensation needs. We're also asking the state to help us with lagging pay in other ways. Specifically, we're restating our need for flexibilities that were part of the biennial budget you approved in August, changes that would provide our institutions and our chancellors with some greater latitude in the use of a variety of resources to address compensation challenges. For instance, it would make good sense for the university to be able to generate or reallocate some of its own resources to get to a genuinely competitive pay plan. And right now, we're very constrained on when and how we can do any of that. The UW, I think, has to take a lead in working on the state's broader economic and social well-being. We're addressing those strategic needs of the state with bold plans, as you know, to increase annual degree production by 30%, granting 80,000 more degrees between now and 2025 above our current levels. We're also working very hard to leverage UW research more effectively in ways that spin off new companies, new jobs, new industries into the private sector and help ensure that our staple Wisconsin industries like paper and manufacturing and others, our agriculture, are competitive in the 21st century. We cannot maintain the university system that we have today, which is envied for its quality and its access, or pursue these bold plans that benefit the entire state without a strong, high-performing workforce. So I want to emphasize that I am, and I know you all are on this board, very proud of the people we have working for us today that get the kind of results working with our students that you just saw in the survey that Terry presented. And I want to give our chancellors the tools they need to hang on to that talent and recruit new talent and deliver on the investment that Wisconsin taxpayers have made in this system over the years. Following, I hope, approval by this board, our pay plan request would be forwarded to the Office of State Employment Relations. Later, that office will present a biennial compensation plan for approval by the legislature's Joint Committee on Employment Relations, which will then recommend it to the full legislature. Obviously, the governor, as he comes into office, will have to make decisions on what he's going to include in this regard in his budget proposal to the legislature. Our UW faculty and staff are deeply, deeply committed to our students and our mission as a public university, and again, you saw that reflected in the survey results we discussed this morning. Their commitment has not diminished. To the contrary, they're out there every day in their classrooms and in their offices and their labs, out in communities all around the state, working hard, serving more students, engaging in more research, finding new ways to serve the broader state population. But I have to tell you, morale is suffering seriously from the furloughs, from pay cuts, from pay rescissions, from higher costs for benefits. And we need, I think, to worry about that morale problem translating into poorer education, translating into weaker research efforts, and translating, finally, into poorer reactions from our students now and in the future. So the question we have to ask ourselves is, how do we best support our faculty and staff in their vital work? How do we offer tangible support, both in competitive compensation and programming resources, so they can continue to help us create that upward spiral of prosperity that we all want for our citizens in Wisconsin? This pay plan action I ask you to take today is one part of the answer to those questions, and I'll turn things over to Al for a minute to see if he wants to add any detail to the resolution that's before you, and then we can open it up. Al, do you want to join us up here, or somewhere with a microphone? Maybe right up at the podium.
Yes, thank you, President Riley. Just a couple of things. This pay plan really was influenced and guided by the recommendations from the Competitive University Workforce Commission, and I think it reflects the positive action, should you pass this resolution, on the recommendations that were presented by that commission, specifically in 3 or 4 cases with the second whereas clause, and that the board would adopt the goal of wanting to bring our average salaries over the next 3 biennia to the median salaries of the peers. This was one of the recommendations from the commission, as was the third whereas clause, indicating that compensation should be the primary consideration that we use in looking at our comparisons. But also in your budget requests, those were requesting the flexibilities in the budgets to provide chancellors with those tools that they need to address the significant market shortfalls that were identified through the Commission's work that were different between and among the institutions and also within different types of employees within the institutions. So to give the chancellors the additional resources through the recruitment retention funds, and also to provide greater flexibility for the use of base dollars and the use of tuition to really address those needs that are so essential to recruit and maintain the competitive workforce at each of our institutions. One of the things that I'd mentioned yesterday was that in this current year, many of our peers received 1.5% to 3.5% increases, while our faculty and staff not only didn't receive an increase, we were furloughed and received a 3% cut in pay. So we're losing ground continually. Other institutions are in the same planning phase we're in, so they haven't set increases for next year. But as we indicate in the resolution here, we expect on average that to be around 2% increase. Plus, we're also expecting that the consumer price index on those items and goods that are most equivalent to what individuals spend their dollars on is going to go up by 1.8% over the next 2 years. So we feel this is a sort of a keep even, if at best, request for the 2% increase each year of the pay plan, which is in the first part of the resolution. And then in the second part just talks about what we have to do to move this forward. And then again, the flexibilities. I think Regent Smith was going to pursue changing the name of our committee to the Business Finance Audit and Flexibilities Committee.
Correct.
So I think
that'll be in February.
In February? Okay. That would be quite good. Because we also reflected additional flexibilities in the guidelines we're asking you to approve today, and that we're providing some additional flexibility in the use of the pay plan dollars to meet specific campus needs, but reaffirming the Regent's strong position that any pay plan increases would be based upon a performance review, that solid performance or meritorious performance would be required before pay plan dollars would be awarded to any individual. So with that, I'll see if there are questions.
Clarify, President Riley, did you say that we're asking for to make the faculty and employees whole from the furlough loss in here?
You're not doing it in here. You already did that
Right.
when you submitted the budget proposal in August.
So this 2% then is kind of under the assumption that that happens.
It's
Well,
requested, hoping that will happen.
Hope that happens.
Yes.
And then this is 2% on that, what would have been the base.
Correct. Correct.
I would like some.
Jessica had a question.
I would like some clarification about what happens at the campuses that have elected to use collective bargaining. If you could explain that a little more.
Sorry, it's so new to us that I forget to mention that, but indeed that's in the resolution, as you will notice, that any pay plan increase for the faculty at Superior and the faculty at Eau Claire would be as a result of a collective bargaining agreement, or for any institutions that vote a union in before the Joker action takes place would be as a result of collective bargaining agreement. So that would mean that, you know, if an increase were awarded through this pay plan process, it would not go to those faculty. That would have to be wait until that a collective bargaining agreement was established between the unions and the Board of Regents, and then being approved through that process again through the Joker and legislature and the governor.
Welsh.
Mike, you were on it.
Yeah, it was co-chaired by Mike Spector and by, well, I'm drawing a blank on her name.
Kathy Seifert.
Kathy Seifert.
Kathy Seifert, right.
From Oshkosh.
Can somebody just tell us, I mean, this wasn't just...
Yeah, the majority were members of the business community. We, however, did have representatives from our faculty and staff. And I think Regent Falbo was on there. Falbo was on there as well. And who may want to comment also on that, because I think there was actually quite a bit of surprise, I think, in terms of getting back to our flexibility theme, at the lack of flexibility that we have in terms of being able to use our resources to be more efficient and effective in trying to deliver what we are charged with delivering.
I think from the standpoint of the business community, there were some business people there, and I think they were greatly surprised at our lack of flexibility and our lack of ability to reward people for performance. Obviously, everybody's aware that the economic times are tough, and but that for all the reasons already stated, that Kevin has stated in his report, that we need to do something. And obviously, what you see in front of you is not outstanding in that direction to, as Kevin said, make up a lot of ground. But there was really no dissenters. I know you asked that, David, when you started out. Everybody was in agreement that this was a good idea. And again, the sentiment was that I can't believe that they're not used to this type of system to reward people for great efforts. Obviously, in the private business world, they have much more flexibility. So it was fairly unanimous. I don't remember anybody, Mike Spector can confirm this, anybody thinking that what came out of that commission was wrong or would change it in any way. This was a unanimous agreement that we should have a system in place that can reward people for their performance.
May I say something, Chuck?
Absolutely.
I would second what Mike said and point out that we also had a representative of the classified union and the professorate. Kathy was an executive vice president before she retired of Kimberly. A very senior corporate person. She's on the boards of directors of some of the most prominent American corporations. Mike characterized her views very accurately, I thought, and those of others on the work task force who were either from small business or were experts in hiring and personnel matters as consultants. And it was, when it was all said and done, the final version, that we had a number of changes at the very end. The final version that we submitted to you was unanimous.
That's what you...
We'll come back and vote for that. No, we'll come back and vote on that at the end with the other resolutions. There's no other questions. Okay.
Regent Crane had a question.
I just want to say that I think that in communicating this in any way, that the listing of those people on that task force should be included.
All right. We then heard from Julie Gordon on the status of 8 projects currently underway for review and audit, 2 of which Judy reported on earlier. Those other 6 are in your materials as far as what stage they are at. We had 2 trust fund items. One, acceptance of new bequests over $50,000. The committee accepted 5 bequests and or gifts with a total value of $2,972,000. We also had a approval of a resolution reaffirming the existing investment policy statement. No substantive revisions in the IPS. Only revisions were updates on the current market values in the funds. In-depth asset allocation analysis and review anticipated during the first half of 2011. Michael Morgan gave us his regular update on HRS. He reported that testing is running a little behind due to additional system testing in order to ensure readiness for going live in the spring of 2011, which we are still well on schedule to do. Vice President Durkin gave us a report on gifts, grants, and contracts. Gifts, contracts, and grants. Our first quarter were $672 million, an increase of $87.6 million over the same period in the prior year. She also noted that federal awards increased $69.6 million, and non-federal increased by $18 million. The major driver of the federal awards increase this quarter is due to the shift of all institutions to the federal direct lending program, which we heard about earlier. We approved a resolution granting the president of the UW system authority to approve changes in the UW system tax-sheltered annuity program's annual participant fee. Sue Chamberlain, who's from our assistant vice president for R, reported that change came initially through recommendations from a tax-sheltered annuity review committee that we actually created to oversee the program. Sue explained that the fee is charged only to UW system employees who participate in the 403B program and only covers the cost of administrating the program. My recollection is about 10,000 current employees who are part of that program. Finally, we approved a resolution granting UW-Madison authority to recruit a vice chancellor for research and dean of the graduate school at a salary that may exceed 75% of the UW system president's salary. So, Mr. President, on behalf of our committee, I move adoption of revised and very slight revisions in Resolution 12B, the Competitive University Workforce Resolution, 12D1, the acceptance of new requests over $50,000, Resolution 12D2, Investment Policy Review and Affirmation, Resolution 12F3, UW System Tax Sheltered Annuity Program Annual Program Participant Fee, and Resolution 12F4, Authorization to recruit a limited appointee at UW-Madison at a salary above 75% of the UW System salary.
Thank you. Is there a second? Is there a request to remove any item from the consent agenda? Not. Is there any discussion? All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The motion is carried.
Concludes our report.
Thank you, Regent Smith. We now move to the report of the Capital Planning and Budget Committee. Regent Bartel.
Thank you, President Pruitt. Our committee first heard yesterday from a presentation by Dr. Greg Mittman, who is the director of the Nelson Institute for Environmental Studies here on the UW-Madison campus. His report was about the UW-Madison Sustainability Initiative, which is an initiative that grew out of Chancellor Martin's strategic priorities. This was a task force that was assembled pursuant to this initiative, consisting of faculty, staff, students, community members, to get together and study issues relating to the stewardship of resources on the UW-Madison campus and to make recommendations as to how UW-Madison can become a model for sustainability. They have issued a report which was distributed to the committee and which can be made available to other regents if you are interested. It's a very comprehensive and I think, thoughtful report. They broke down into working groups consisting of governance, communication, campus environment, energy, materials and consumption, food, transportation, and health. And each of those working groups put together some recommendations. The final report has, I think, two basic recommendations. One is the creation of an Office of Sustainability under the Provost and Vice Chancellor for Administration to kind of coordinate the efforts that are taking place all over campus for sustainability. Some people here are doing one thing, other people there are maybe doing something similar but not the same, and this office is designed to bring all of that together and to create a unified approach to this. Secondly, they have created a number of targets or goals that the campus wants to meet. And to do so, they are proposing a system to connect campus operations, the education function, and the research function of the university. Bring all of those things together to focus on sustainability on this campus. I think it's a very thoughtful approach, and I think the committee was very much impressed with the work that has been done. We then took up a number of resolutions, and I'll run through them. A resolution was brought forward by UW Extension requesting authority to lease space in the Research Park in Madison. This is a 10-year lease which will replace an existing lease in the University Research Park and will consolidate space for not only the Extension's Division of Continuing Education Outreach and E-Learning, but will add to that the UW College's online and the Academic Distributed Co-Lab. And these are three organizations, each of which make use of online courses. And it will allow these groups to get together in one location and coordinate their efforts and basically take advantage of the network connectivity of that the Research Park offers on a, I would say, on a financially advantageous basis. Our next resolution was brought by UW-Madison requesting authority to accept 7 land parcels, that's real estate parcels, pursuant to the Real Estate Property Exchange Agreement between WARF, Wisconsin Alumni Research Foundation, and the Board of Regents. And you'll recall, we've talked about this before, the exchange agreement it grew out of the need for UW-Madison to exchange certain properties with WARF in order to create the Wisconsin Institutes for Discovery. Those Institutes for Discovery, by the way, just opened a week ago or so. If you haven't seen them, they are really quite remarkable. You should make a point to go in there. Open to the public at almost all hours. All of the properties, these are properties that WARF has acquired and now is going to exchange for the properties that UW-Madison gave to WARF for the creation of the Institute. All of these properties are within the campus boundaries, and most of them are identified in the 2005 Campus Master Plan for Madison. And they are sites for future academic research and support buildings. One parcel, which is located right across the street from the Institutes for Discovery, West Johnson Street, is within the campus boundaries but was originally designated for private development, but now probably can be used as part of the campus plan. So the total value of these properties that are being exchanged is slightly more than $6 million. So we've almost exhausted the exchange value of the properties that were given for WID. Our next resolution seeks authority to begin planning of the West Campus Cogeneration Facility addition and chiller installation projects at Madison. This whole project is expected to cost about $67 million, but our action here is to authorize release of about $1.6 million to prepare preliminary plans, create a design report, and construction documents. So this is just getting the project off the ground. With Resolution 1.3.F, which is our next one, the UW-Milwaukee seeks authority to lease space for the new School of Public Health building, which we've talked about before in downtown Milwaukee. It will create the initial spaces to support the new school that will be located in the redevelopment part of the historic Pabst Brewery. The project will renovate an existing 5-story building in the brewery as well as construct a 5-story addition. And the resulting facility will provide space to support initial research, core facilities, collaboration, administration, teaching and instruction, and external partners' needs at the School of Public Health. And you'll recall that this is a project that is financially assisted by a generous $10 million gift from Joseph Zilber and now his estate, honoring the pledge that he made to UW-Milwaukee. The lease includes an option to purchase the project upon completion or in subsequent years, and that it is, I think, intended to happen, that authority will be sought at the time of occupancy using the Zilber gift to cover the majority of what will be about a $12.3 million cost. Our next resolution is brought by UW-Platteville, seeks authority to request a waiver to allow an RFP for a design-built entity to design and construct a $1.7 million storage facility on campus. It will have offices, maintenance shop, stores, storage operations, and so forth. Our next resolution is by the UW system to seek the enumeration of 7 additional projects in the 2011-13 capital budget, 5 of which will be totally funded by program revenues or gift or grant funds. It is not unusual that, you recall that we did submit our 11-13 capital budget in August, I believe, and this board voted on it. It is not unusual to add projects to that request that were not entirely fleshed out at the time, where the funding was not entirely clear, where the design was not completed. We have now added, we propose to add 7 additional projects. I'll run through them very quickly. More detail is available if you want them. At UW Stout Harvey Hall, which we've talked about before, Phase 2 is the first of these. It's a $29 million project, and the second of 2 that will renovate and remodel what is really quite a deteriorated space in Harvey Hall. The improvements will include building envelope repairs, upgrades to plumbing, mechanical, building automation, electrical, telecommunications, card access, and life safety systems. Typically, we often try to accomplish this kind of stuff in the all-agency maintenance and repair budget. We put this off long enough that there's so much to do that we're actually making it a capital budget request, $29 million. At La Crosse, there is a $1 million project to design and construct a new pre-engineered metal storage building to alleviate that campus's lack of storage space for materials and grounds maintenance equipment. At UW-Madison, they are proposing a $1.5 million project that will construct an addition to the Materials Distribution Services warehouse in Verona, which offers climate-controlled storage for approximately $1 million volumes of library materials for the general library system here on the UW-Madison campus. Also, Madison is proposing a $2.5 million all-seasons golf practice facility out at University Ridge. This project is entirely gift-funded by 2 donors, and we checked on this, whose gifts have already been received. So that money is in hand. And it will construct an all-season practice facility for at University Ridge Golf Course, which will be home for the men's and women's golf teams. At UW-Whitewater, they want us to include in our 2011-13 capital budget $4.6 million to upgrade the 45-year-old Drumlin Dining Hall HVAC systems and replace the building's inefficient single-glazed windows. This project will remodel the kitchen and seating area and include improvements for better accessibility. Also at Whitewater, we're seeking authority to use $900,000 of agency cash to construct an addition to the Young Auditorium that will provide a new dance studio floor and create classroom and rehearsal space for the university's growing dance program. And finally, in the capital budget, we are proposing to add at UW River Falls for advanced enumeration, and that means enumeration in the 2013-15 capital budget, funds to construct a new building for the Health and Human Performance Programs, Athletic and Student Recreation. And this is as an addition to the existing Hunt Knolls complex. Those of us who have visited that campus and seen that facility are just really quite appalled at the age and Regent Davis said antiquity of the equipment that is located in that facility. The new facility will include classrooms and human performance laboratory, a large gymnasium, dance studio, auxiliary gym, offices, locker rooms, training rooms, and other support spaces. This is a $63 million project that is badly needed, and it will, the advanced enumeration also will allow the campus to begin in earnest the development of gift funds for the project. So those are the 7 projects that we propose to add to our 2011-13 capital budget. And finally, we had one additional resolution which requests authority to construct 15 all-agency maintenance and repair projects at 9 campuses, totaling $15.7 million. And those are listed in your materials. These 7 resolutions were passed unanimously, although I think Regent Stan Davis may have abstained on, you didn't abstain on one? Oh, you just weren't there on that one. Okay.
Oh, called out by your chair there, Regent Davis.
Well, we just kind of assumed that he was abstaining, didn't we? Yeah, I think. So they were passed unanimously by the committee. And I now move adoption of resolutions 1.3 C, D, E, F, G, I, and J.
Moved and seconded. Is there a request to remove any item from the consent agenda? If not, is there discussion on any item on the consent agenda? If not, all those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Those are agreed to.
Finally, Mr. President, Associate Vice President David Miller presented to the committee the UW Systems 2011-17 Physical Development Plan and stated that our investment in facilities is essential to our mission as a public university. And Senior Architect Jeff Kozlowski described the 6-year plan, which is being submitted to the Department of Administration on behalf of all 15 system institutions. It is in limited edition right now, but it is a very useful document describing where we think we're going to be going in the next 6 years or so. Yeah, it does make a lot of assumptions, of course, about the availability of funding as well as intervening critical needs which can come up and which can push off other projects. But what you'll find in here and what the Department of Administration and presumably the new administration will find is where the system believes that we should be going with capital development, capital improvements, and where the campuses think that they need to go and what they might be able to expect during this. Mr. President, this concludes the report of the Capital Planning and Budget Committee.
Thank you. We now move to our... yes, Regent Davis.
Limited edition, does that mean we will get one day?
Not, no.
Well, it is online, I understand.
Give her that one. My goodness.
She wants one that folds out with
I'm going to give her mine, David.
pretty pictures.
I'm giving her mine.
I work for a nonprofit. There's a lot of pages to print online. Thank you so much. Okay. Thank you.
We did hear the sustainability report first.
Thank you. Thank you.
David Miller will have a book signing coming up.
And I will promise to read and memorize. No, really, thank you.
We're going to move to the resolution of appreciation, which Regent Welsh will do. But I did want to note that Chancellor Martin sent an email last evening that she is feeling under the weather. She has a bronchitis infection, which is why she has not joined us today. But she sent her best wishes. I think Interim Chancellor Lovell maybe wore her out on that free throw shooting contest. Kind of a Pyrrhic victory, but a victory nonetheless. But anyway, she wishes us all well, and we wish her a speedy recovery. But I just wanted to acknowledge that's the reason she isn't here.
Thank you. I have a resolution to read from the Regents, but first I want to make a couple comments. University of Wisconsin-Madison, for me, has always been a special place. I grew up in the shadows of Camp Randall. My father was a coach here, and around the dinner table, because all our neighbors were from the faculty and staff, it was always the subject matter. One little vignette, though, I want to mention. About 3 years ago, I was involved in raising approximately $1.2 million for a special project on photoreceptor cells using derived ES cells and IPS cells. And we didn't have the resources at the University of Wisconsin at the time in terms of researchers, so we shared the project with Harvard, Utah, and Southern California. 2 years later, we made some huge breakthroughs, which has resulted in another $5 million coming to the University of Wisconsin. My point in this is that at the final meeting, when we prepared everything, it was clear the University of Wisconsin was cutting edge and was way ahead of everybody. And the fellow from Harvard, Professor Howard Young, came to me and he said, you know, I never knew anything about Wisconsin, University of Wisconsin-Madison. I'd never even been here. He said, but the difference here at the University of Wisconsin-Madison is that when I walked into the Weissman Center and when I walked over to the University of Wisconsin Hospital and clinics, the doors were open. And I was introduced to world-class researchers who talked to me and who shared with me your research. At Harvard, he said, it's like a silo. We work for ourselves and we publish for ourselves. And that's why the University of Wisconsin-Madison, just like the Wisconsin idea, we share, we spread it out, and that's why we're world-class in this field today. And today we are the only people that develops photoreceptor cells, ganglion cells, and epithelial cells, where 5 years ago nobody could do it in a petri dish. And it's because we share, and it's because this place is simply a little bit different. And it's the reason we developed workman's comp and Social Security here at the University of Wisconsin, and it's because we share. And I just wanted to mention that because as we go forward today and as we fight for funds and we have the job of dialoguing with the decision makers, we've got to always remember what this state's about and what this great university is about and what our great, great system is about. It's about working together for the people of the state of Wisconsin. So I have a resolution of appreciation for UW-Madison. With all due respect to Jesus Salas, I have to read it with the whereases. Whereas the members of the Board of Regents of the University of Wisconsin system are proud of the global impact and international reach of the University of Wisconsin-Madison in research, teaching, and outreach. And whereas Chancellor Biddy Martin's administration is identifying innovative new ways to make the campus even more efficient and effective and provide enhanced quality for the entire state of Wisconsin through the New Badger Partnership and the Madison Initiative for Undergraduates. And whereas by aligning research and education on sustainability with campus operations, UW-Madison is aiming to become a living model for sustainability, exemplifying values and actions that demonstrate a deep commitment to stewardship of resources. And whereas the university conducts more than $1 billion worth of research each year in the sciences, arts, and humanities and provides Wisconsin with a powerful economic engine that has the potential to lead the state out of the economic challenges it faces. And whereas UW-Madison continues to prepare students to compete successfully in a global economy by developing their critical thinking skills and encouraging them to apply their knowledge in and out of the classroom. And whereas UW-Madison has reached out to promote existing new partnerships and initiatives with universities in East Asia and has brought a group of some of China's most talented athletes to campus to gain leadership skills for the future as part of the Chinese Champions Program. And whereas the university's faculty has demonstrated continued excellence in the classroom, and recently with the naming of soil scientist Terry Balzer as U.S. Professor of the Year by the Council of the Advancement and Support of Education, and whereas UW-Madison has just opened impressive new facilities, such as the Wisconsin Institutes for Discovery and the revamped Education Building, and is looking ahead with projects like the Wisconsin Energy Institute, the Charter Street Heating Plant, and WIMR, and the new Union South, Be it therefore resolved that the University of Wisconsin Board of Regents hereby thanks Chancellor Biddy Martin and all of her colleagues for making the campus a valued Wisconsin asset that benefits the world educationally, economically, culturally, and socially, and for sharing their campus hospitality and engaging presentations as they hosted this December 2010 board meeting. I so move.
Second. Second. All in favor?
Aye.
Anybody opposed? It's agreed to. Paul, DeLuca is here. You want to accept this? Do we give these resolutions to anybody?
We
can't remember.
They're online.
They're online, and we don't print them out. Paul, thank you. Are there any communications, petitions, or memorials? Yes, Regent Crane.
No, I guess it would more likely be unfinished and additional business.
Is there any unfinished or additional business to come before the board?
Yesterday, we didn't really have an opportunity to respond to the reports made by President Pruitt and President Riley, and I just wanted to say that I very heartily applaud the efforts that the system administration and the chancellors have made on the issues of civility and respect and the incidents that have occurred on our campuses. I think nothing has been more disturbing to me in the last years than reading of some of those instances, and we just must be proactive in addressing those. I appreciate what has been done on the campuses and the communication. Civility is almost an inadequate word. We're talking about respect and appreciation for other people, and I just would like you to know that the Board of Regents cares about that too.
Any other unfinished business? Regent Drew.
Just to add to what Judy said, I think we should commend the students who have stood up and participated in demonstrations and other activities against the race or sexual orientation-based vandalism and bullying on the campuses.
Thank you. Agreed. Other comments? Unfinished business? If not, we will take a 10-minute recess. The board will then reconvene in open session to consider a resolution to recess into closed session. Thank you.